They said I was dead, that my body was found among the wreckage of a base destroyed by an airstrike, charred, unrecognizable, but with documents bearing my name. That was enough. A dog tag, a scrap of fabric, and the government's haste were all it took to turn a man who survived 3 tours in Afghanistan and 2 decades of honorable service into a silent martyr, buried without a body, without truth, without a voice. The day I learned of my own death, hiding in a poor village with a swollen face and broken bones, was the day something in me truly died. Not the flesh, but the trust. I saw myself in newspaper photos, in obituaries with words too beautiful for a man who was never publicly loved in life. I saw my wife dressed in black, holding my eldest son's hand, as a folded flag was silently handed over by an officer who didn't even know my face. I saw my house surrounded by flowers and reporters, saw the faces bidding me farewell, without knowing I was still breathing somewhere between delirium and fever. And while my country buried my name, I fought to not be buried for real, not by bombs or wounds, but by omission. There was no phone, no radio, no rescue. There was only me, my memories, and a brutal void that hurt more than any physical wound. Each passing day, I wondered if it was truly possible that it had all been a mistake, or if someone, in some cold, silent office, found it more convenient to erase me. Because a dead man doesn't ask questions, doesn't open his mouth, doesn't threaten systems. And the truth I carried, the truth about what really happened on that mission, was something perhaps no one wanted to hear. But I survived. And the only thing more dangerous than an angry soldier is a soldier who came back from the grave demanding answers. It was 103 days. I counted everyone. With the tip of a rusty knife, I scratched small marks into the rotting wood of what was once a window. Not to stay sane, but to remind myself I was still alive. It was a prison without bars, but full of voices, some real, others born of fever. I stayed hidden in a remote village, where an old man named Murad gave me shelter without ever asking my name. Maybe he knew. Maybe he just took pity. I was too thin, too weak, my bones still healing after the impact, and a long crawling trek through the hills. My right leg wouldn't bend fully, my left hand trembled, and the pain in my chest constantly reminded me that air was still coming in, even when the world cast me out. The only thing keeping me upright was rage, not the blind, destructive kind, but the kind of rage that burns silently, steadily like embers under the skin, a fire that fuels the decision to return, to rise, to refuse to be erased so easily. While I drank dirty water and ate scraps, the United States buried me with honors. The same people who once promised me protection, who sent me to war zones under the guise of national security, now treated me as a closed file. My name, my record, my history, all frozen, as if my existence had been just an inconvenient chapter that deserved to be sealed shut. At night, when sleep wouldn't come, I thought of my family's faces. Not the recent ones, but the old ones. My wife laughing in a summer dress, my young son with paint-smeared hands, my daughter clinging to my neck before I left for my last mission. I repeated their names like a prayer, because that was all I had left, memory and rage, and a plan to get out of that hell, even if I had to crawl, and to come back, not just to prove I was alive, but to find out why exactly they killed me on paper with such haste. It took nearly 4 months for my body to endure more than breathing and hobbling. With help from Murad and 2 young men from the village who saw me as some kind of lost war spirit, I mapped out a clandestine escape route involving bribes, supply trucks, and a lot of silence. My face was different, older than the photos that had aired on TV, but my eyes still burned with the urgency of someone who knew that stepping onto American soil wouldn't make me a hero. It would make me living proof of a mistake no one wanted to admit. I reached neutral ground, exhausted, starving, with raw fingers and an improvised dossier of fragments from the attack I'd pieced together from the rubble. An old army contact, now retired, helped with the final steps. A makeshift passport, transport, and the warning that, if you're really alive, David, you'll have to prove it on your own. And that's exactly what I did. I returned to my country through the back door. The moment I set foot on American soil, I felt invisible. I gave my real name at a local police station in New Jersey and got a blank stare, followed by a request for ID. I handed over what I had. The officer typed, waited, and said matter-of-factly, "This man is dead." My blood ran cold. I insisted. Said it was him, it was me. Showed scars, recited names of classified missions, codes only a veteran would know. The cop thought I was a lunatic or someone pulling a sick scam. I was detained for a few hours, interrogated as a suspect, until an informal call from an old sergeant who recognized my voice kept me from being sent for a psych evaluation. Even then, when I was released, I understood the path to reclaiming. My identity would be longer than escaping the jungle. They erased me, literally. My social security number, my benefits, all inactive. My bank account closed. My name no longer listed among the living. To the country I defended with my body. And soul, I was a ghost. And like a ghost, I'd have to haunt those who buried me by force. The first thing I did was try to reach my wife. Not to barge into her new life, which, by the way, I didn't even know about, but because she was the only one who might still recognize me beyond my appearance, beyond documents, beyond doubt. I took a regular bus, sat among strangers, and rehearsed what I'd say, but it all jumbled inside me. When I got off in our old neighborhood, it felt like stepping into a past that I didn't realize still hurt so much. The houses were the same, the air was the same. Even the white fence I'd built with my own hands still surrounded our garden. But inside it, there was another reality. A different car in the driveway. 2 kids' bikes. And when the door opened, it was a man who answered. For a second, I felt like a shadow invading a home. Only then did I see, behind him, the silhouette of the woman I'd dreamed of so many feverish nights. She saw me and froze. Her reaction broke me inside. It wasn't a scream, it wasn't tears, it was silence, a devastating silence, full of everything no one knows how to say in the face of the impossible. I tried to explain, but my voice sounded strange, even to me. I said I was alive, that they'd made a mistake, that I didn't want anything, just to be seen, recognized. The man beside her, who I later learned was her new husband, was tense but not hostile. And she just asked, with tear-filled eyes, not to do this to her again, as if my return was a new kind of abandonment. In that moment, I realized I hadn't just lost my documents. I'd lost my place. Time moved on, and I was stuck in 2019 in that attack, that explosion, that base that took not just my comrades, but my entire life with it. After that, everything changed. I stopped seeking reunions. I started seeking answers. And the more I dug into the official mission records, the more gaps I found. No footage of the base after the attack had been released to the public. The operation files were restricted, even to retired military. A colleague from intelligence who still kept in touch from peacetime said over the phone, in the lowest voice I'd ever heard, "David, I saw the report. It was altered." When I asked by whom, he hung up. Days later, his online profile was gone, and that's when I understood. Maybe I wasn't declared dead by mistake. Maybe my death was the only convenient way to keep something much bigger from surfacing. With every step I took toward the truth, the ground beneath me grew shakier, I reached out to 3 men who served with me on that mission. 2 didn't respond. The third, a comms operator named Ramirez, met me in an Ohio diner with a cap covering half his face and an expression mixing shock and guilt. He looked at me like he was seeing a ghost, and only after a few minutes managed to say something. "David, you shouldn't be here." The words weren't just a statement, they were a warning. He didn't want to elaborate, but he handed me a USB drive. "This doesn't exist, and if it does, I never saw you." Then he left, without touching the coffee he'd ordered. That night, locked in a cheap motel room, I watched the USB's contents, trembling like a man about to relive his own death. There were images of the base after the attack, footage never released, medical reports, survivor lists, and amid it all, a transcript of an intercepted communication before the explosion. A name, Lancaster. My name, linked to an order to neutralize the threat before return to American soil. That's when the knot tightened in my stomach. I hadn't just been declared dead. Someone decided it was better that way, and everything pointed to the reason being something I saw or knew on that last mission. But I couldn't remember. Maybe because of the trauma, maybe because of the head injury, maybe because my mind deep down was trying to protect me. I started searching for clues about what we'd done in the days before the attack. I messaged former analysts, scoured public records, digging through security protocols, ghost operations, anything that might jog my memory of what justified killing a soldier under their own flag. And then, slowly, a fragment of memory returned. The image of a man being removed from a facility by our team. A civilian, injured, terrified, a scientist, an agent. No one said anything that night, just short orders, extract, contain, silence. The next morning, my email was hacked. My burner phone buzzed incessantly until it died, and when I left the motel room, I noticed the white car parked across the street was there for the 3rd day in a row. I wasn't paranoid. I was trained, and I knew surveillance when I saw it. They knew I was digging, and they were letting me see they knew. It was a dirty game, where I was just a loose piece that should have vanished, but their mistake was letting me live. A dead man has nothing left to lose, and I still had the truth, even if I had to claw it out of the darkness where it was buried, inch by inch. I met him in the parking lot of an abandoned church, on an afternoon when the sky was so low it seemed about to collapse. Colonel Richard Claiborne, the man who recruited me for the mission, who signed the papers that sent me overseas, and who, until that moment, I still believed was on the right side. He showed up as always, dark suit, unshakable expression, the gaze of someone who'd buried more secrets than soldiers. "You shouldn't be here, David," he said, sounding tired but not surprised. "You should be at peace." The word disgusted me. Peace? Peace doesn't grow from lies. I was alive, too scarred with too few memories and a fury that no longer fit in my chest. I told him I knew about the order, that I saw my name tied to something that shouldn't have been touched, that I wouldn't return to the grave without showing the world what they did. He didn't deny it, didn't flinch, just looked at me, like he was talking to a lost son. "You saw what you weren't supposed to. You took something you don't understand. And now you're risking everything for a sense of justice the world no longer wants to carry." He also said, they let me live for one reason, because it was more convenient for me to die alone than in headlines, that everything was settled with my family, the records, the narrative. David Lancaster was a hero. Let him stay that way. Don't push and turn into a traitor. That hit me like a blow to the chest. They wanted to keep the illusion, use my name as a symbol, and while the real man was just a living threat. I recorded the conversation, every word. And I made it clear that if anything happened to me again, it would go to the press, to veterans, to the few reporters who still believed in truce without a uniform. He said I was digging my own grave. I replied that they'd already dug one, for me once, and I clawed my way out with my own hands. That night, I hid in a veterans' shelter in Charleston. A man named Gus, a war amputee with more anger at the system than me, gave me a bed, a laptop, and a bottle of whiskey. I edited the audio, wrote a report with everything I knew, and sent it to 4 different destinations: an investigative journalist, a senator with a military background, an alternative news channel, and a lawyer known for suing the government. I sat in front of the bathroom mirror and looked at myself like it was the first time. The face was older, harder, stranger, but the eyes were still mine. For the first time since I returned, I felt whole, and I understood. They could have killed me on paper, but I was still breathing, and that was enough to tear down any lie. The morning the story broke, I woke to the sound of tires screeching outside the shelter. It wasn't pursuit, it was the press. Not the sensationalist kind, but serious people with bags under their eyes, notepads and microphones sweating in their hands. The story spread like wildfire. Veteran declared dead reappears, denounces military conspiracy. The first public reaction was disbelief. The second, outrage. Within hours, my image, aged, scarred, alive, was everywhere. And with it, questions no one could silence anymore. Why was I declared dead so quickly? Why were my records erased? Who profited from my silence? And most importantly, what were they trying to hide? The senator who received my dossier called for a public hearing. For the first time in years, I used my full name in front of a microphone. I wasn't clean, I wasn't healed, but I was steady. I told what I remembered, showed the evidence, and said with a trembling voice, "I don't want medals, I don't want honors. I want the government that buried my name to have the courage to face my face." The impact was immediate. The Itu military stayed silent. The Department of Defense hid behind vague statements. But the people reacted. I received letters from families, from other soldiers, from mothers who buried sons without knowing if the story was true. For the first time, my survival served something bigger than just keeping my heart beating. It served to expose the kind of machine that manufactures heroes and then discards them. But with visibility came threats. Anonymous letters, cars following me at a distance, interference on my phone. I knew I'd poked an old silent structure built to stay unseen. And still, I kept going. Because I didn't come back to live in hiding. I came back to exist in truth. And if I had to shout until my throat bled, I would. Because there's something more dangerous than death, and it's oblivion. And I, David Lancaster, wouldn't be forcibly forgotten a second time. After the hearing, the interviews stopped, but the stares remained. Most looked at me with respect, others with fear, as if I carried a dirty piece of truth no one wanted to hold. But the eyes that hurt the most to meet again were hers. My wife, ex-wife now. She sought me out after weeks of silence and found me sitting on the same park bench where we used to take our kids. Her presence undid me more than any death threat. She was different, steadier, harder, maybe afraid of breaking again. She looked at me with a mix of longing and guilt. "You didn't do anything wrong," she said. "But my life moved on." I nodded. It was fair. She had every right to move forward. What hurt wasn't the distance between us. It was the time that was forcibly torn away, like pages ripped from a diary by someone else. In the days that followed, I saw my children, one at a time. The eldest looked at me like he was facing a monument. The youngest cried and hugged me tightly. There was no perfect reunion, because real life doesn't resolve with manufactured happy endings. But there was something more valuable: reconnection. They wanted to understand, and I wanted to listen. For the first time, I allowed myself to share stories I'd never told anyone. The fear of dying forgotten, the shame of returning to find everything changed, the weight of fighting a machine that trains us to obey and punishes us when we choose, to survive outside its script. Meanwhile, the country split. Some called me a hero, others a traitor. I got offers to write a book, give speeches, lead campaigns for military reform. I declined them all. I didn't want to be a symbol. I didn't want to be a martyr. I just wanted to exist as a man. The David who returned was a stranger even to me, but he was there, breathing. And if there was one thing I finally understood, it was that my greatest mission wasn't on the battlefields. It was on this shaky ground of home, of memory, of restart, in the simple and complex act of carrying on. The day they officially restored my identity was the emptiest and most symbolic of my life. A brown envelope, a formal letter, a reactivated social security number, and a protocol apology signed by 3 names I'd never crossed paths with in the field. It was as if they were saying, "Here's what we took. Done. Now disappear quietly." But I didn't disappear. I tucked the paper in the drawer of the house I rented on the outskirts of a small town where no one knew me. I didn't hang my rank on the wall. I didn't display medals. I just put up an old photo of me with the kids when they still thought I was invincible, and a picture of the woman who loved me as best she could, until time, pain, and the system pulled us apart. I started living slowly, making furniture with my hands, visiting schools to talk to teens about choices and responsibility, without a uniform, without status, just as someone who was swallowed by a system and spat back out. I didn't seek justice anymore, not because I gave up, but because I understood that justice isn't always a shout. Sometimes it's just the right to keep living, and that now no one could take from me. The final step was returning the silence. I wrote a letter to Colonel Claiborne, not with threats, but with truths. I told him he didn't need to hunt me anymore, that I'd won, not because I exposed the system, but because I survived it. I said he hadn't taken anything I hadn't already rebuilt with my own hands. And I ended with a single line: I didn't die. And that will haunt you more than any words I could have said. Today, I'm just a name many have forgotten and some still whisper with caution. But for me, that's enough. Because the real victory isn't in becoming who I was again. It's in learning to be who they never let me be. And as long as there's air in my lungs and truth in my chest, no one will bury me before my time again. David Lancaster didn't return to be recognized. He returned to not be forgotten. The man mistakenly declared dead, buried with empty honors, and erased from official records, rose from the silence with the only weapon he still carried, the truce. He didn't give fiery speeches. He didn't become a face on billboards, but in the quiet dignity of someone who survived the system, he taught that courage isn't just in surviving war, but in surviving the country that insists on bearing its own soldiers. Today, he lives far from the spotlight. He works with his hands, talks to those who listen, and writes letters he never sends. But his story can no longer be silenced, because sometimes the greatest act of resistance is staying alive when the whole world swore you no longer existed.